I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Henshaw standing on my front porch with her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. The HOA president had that look on her face, the one that said she was about to ruin someone's day and thoroughly enjoy doing it. Yates Valdez. She asked, even though she knew exactly who I was. We had lived in Meadowbrook Heights, Colorado for 3 years now, and Patricia had made it her personal mission to know every single resident by name, address, and whatever minor infractions she could dig up. "That would be me," I said, not bothering to open the screen door. My coffee was getting cold and I had a full day of work ahead of me. I ran a small HVAC business and Monday mornings were always brutal. "I am here on official HOA business," Patricia announced, pulling out a sheet of paper from her clipboard. "It has come to our attention that you are storing propane tanks on your property in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 8 of our community guidelines." I blinked at her. "You mean the two 20-pound tanks I keep for my grill? Propane storage is strictly prohibited in Meadowbrook Heights," she said, tapping the paper with one manicured fingernail. "It is a safety hazard and an eyesore." "An eyesore. They are behind my house next to the shed. You cannot even see them from the street." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The rules apply to all areas of your property, Mr. Valdez. Visible or not, you are in violation. You have 72 hours to remove the propane tanks, or we will be forced to levy fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what I was hearing. "Patricia, half the neighborhood has propane tanks. The Johnsons have a whole outdoor kitchen setup with a built-in propane line. The Martins have a fire pit that runs on propane. Are you going after them too? Those installations were grandfathered in before the current regulations took effect," she said smoothly. "Your tanks were added after the rule change last year." "What rule change? I never got any notice about that." "It was sent via email to all residents in March of last year. Failure to read HOA communications does not exempt you from compliance." She held out the paper. "This is your official notice. 72 hours, Mr. Valdez. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my walkway, leaving me standing there with the notice in my hand and my blood pressure rising. I scanned the document quickly. Sure enough, there it was in black and white. "No propane storage permitted on any residential property within Meadowbrook Heights, effective March 15th of the previous year." The thing was, I had never received that email. I kept meticulous records of all HOA communications specifically because Patricia had a reputation for pulling stunts like this. I went inside and pulled up my email, searching for anything from the HOA around that date. Nothing. I checked my spam folder, my trash, everywhere. There was no email about any rule change. I had a sinking feeling that Patricia had sent it to an outdated email list or had simply never sent it at all. But here was the thing about HOA disputes. It did not matter if you were right. What mattered was who had the power, and Patricia held all the cards as president. She could find me, put a lien on my house, and make my life miserable in 100 different ways. Fighting her would cost more in time and legal fees than just complying. I spent the rest of that Monday fuming about it while I worked on a furnace repair in Denver. The homeowner, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, noticed my mood. "You all right, honey?" she asked, bringing me a glass of water while I worked. "You seem upset about something." I found myself explaining the whole situation. Sometimes it helped to vent to someone who had no stake in the drama. Mrs. Chen shook her head sympathetically. "HOAs are terrible. My daughter lives in one of those communities. They tried to fine her for having the wrong shade of beige on her mailbox. Beige. Who can even tell the difference? It is the principle of the thing, I said. These people get a little bit of power and suddenly they think they can run everyone's life. Well, I hope you figure something out, she said. People like that usually get what is coming to them eventually. I finished the job and headed home, still turning the problem over in my mind. As I pulled into Meadowbrook Heights, I noticed something that sparked a memory. The community center sat at the entrance to our development. A nice building with meeting rooms, a small gym, and a commercial kitchen that residents could rent for events. The kitchen ran entirely on propane. 3 large 500-gallon tanks sat behind the building, enclosed by a decorative fence, and those tanks got their propane from somewhere. I happened to know where, because I had done some HVAC work on the community center 2 years ago. The propane was supplied by Mountain Gas Company, and the supply line ran underground from the street to those tanks. More importantly, that supply line ran directly under my property. When they had built the community center 5 years ago, before I bought my house, the HOA had secured an easement from the original owner of my lot to run the gas line through. I had the paperwork somewhere in my files. The easement agreement. And unless I was very much mistaken, that easement included a clause about maintaining good relations with the property owner. It was standard language, the kind of thing nobody ever paid attention to until it mattered. That evening, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the document. There it was, buried in the legal jargon. The easement was granted contingent upon mutually beneficial relations between the parties, and could be terminated with 30 days' notice if either party felt the agreement was no longer serving its intended purpose. A plan began forming in my mind. It was petty, it was vindictive, and it was probably going to cause a massive headache for everyone involved. But I was tired of Patricia and her arbitrary rules. I was tired of being pushed around, and I was especially tired of HOAs that wielded their power like tyrants. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres who had helped me set up my business. I explained the situation and asked if my interpretation of the easement was correct. "Let me look at the document," she said. I scanned it and emailed it over. She called me back 20 minutes later. "Okay, this is interesting. Yes, you could technically terminate the easement with 30 days' notice. But Yates, you understand what that would mean, right? They would have to reroute the entire gas supply to the community center. That would be expensive and disruptive." "That is kind of the point," I said, "and they will probably sue you. They will argue that you are acting in bad faith, that you are causing harm out of spite. Can they win?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, probably not. The language in this easement is pretty clear. You have the right to terminate it. Whether you should is a different question. This will make you very unpopular in your neighborhood." "I am already unpopular with the people who matter," I said. "Patricia has been looking for reasons to find me since the day I moved in. This is just the latest excuse." "All right," Rebecca said. "If you want to do this, I will draft the termination notice, but think about it first. Make sure this is really the hill you want to die on." I thought about it for the rest of the day. I thought about it while I replaced a heat exchanger in Lakewood. I thought about it while I drove home through rush hour traffic. I thought about it while I ate a quiet dinner alone in my kitchen, looking out at the 2 propane tanks that were apparently such a dire threat to community safety. And then I called Rebecca back and told her to draft the notice. The next day was Wednesday. I received another notice from the HOA, this time slipped under my door. It reminded me that I had less than 48 hours to remove the propane tanks and included a helpful list of local propane disposal services. The tone was condescending, as if I were a child who needed remedial instruction on how to follow simple rules. I took a photo of the notice, then called Rebecca. "How is that termination notice coming?" "Just finished it," she said. "I will email it over for your review. If you approve, we can send it certified mail today." I read through the document carefully. It was professional, polite, and absolutely clear. Effective 30 days from receipt of this notice, the easement allowing Mountain Gas Company access through my property to service the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center would be terminated. The HOA would need to make alternative arrangements. "Send it," I told Rebecca. "You are sure about this?" "I am sure." The notice went out that afternoon. I also followed Rebecca's advice and sent a courtesy copy directly to Patricia, just so there could be no confusion about my intentions. Then I moved my propane tanks into my garage, where they were no longer visible from any angle outside my house. Technically, I had not removed them from my property, but they were out of sight. I wondered if Patricia would consider that compliance or find some new violation to cite me for. I did not have to wait long for a response. At 7:30 that evening, someone started pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia standing there, her face red with fury. Behind her stood Marcus Webb, the HOA vice president, looking uncomfortable. I opened the door. "Good evening. What the hell do you think you are doing?" Patricia shrieked, waving the termination notice in my face. "You cannot do this." "I believe I can," I said calmly. "My lawyer reviewed the easement agreement. I have every right to terminate it with 30 days' notice. This is blackmail. This is extortion. You are trying to force us to back down on the propane tank issue." "I am not trying to force you to do anything," I said. "You made a decision about my property. I am making a decision about my property. They are completely separate matters." "Bullshit," Patricia spat. "You are doing this because you are angry about the propane tanks. Admit it." "Whether I am angry or not does not change the legal situation," I said. "The easement exists at my discretion. I am exercising my right to terminate it." Marcus stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Yates, let us all take a breath here. Maybe we can work something out. What if we suspended the violation notice? Would you reconsider the easement termination?" "No," I said simply. Patricia's eyes bulged. "No, you are going to cut off gas to the community center over 2 propane tanks. You are going to fine me $100 a day over 2 propane tanks," I pointed out. "At least my action has some legal basis. Your rule change was never properly communicated to residents. I have no email, no physical notice, nothing. You are enforcing a regulation that I had no reasonable way of knowing existed." "It was sent out," Patricia insisted. "Prove it," I said. "Show me the email server logs. Show me the delivery confirmation, because I have nothing in my inbox and I have never deleted an HOA email in my life." Marcus and Patricia exchanged a look. That told me everything I needed to know. The email had never been sent, or had been sent to an incomplete list, or something else had gone wrong. They had no proof that I had been properly notified. "This is not over," Patricia said, her voice low and threatening. "We will fight this. We will sue you into the ground if we have to." "That is your right," I said, "and I will see you in court. Now, if you will excuse me, I have had a long day." I closed the door in her face. My hands were shaking, but I felt oddly exhilarated. I had spent 3 years bowing to Patricia's petty tyranny, watching her harass neighbors over grass height and fence colors and parking violations. Finally, I was pushing back. The next few days were tense. I received multiple emails from the HOA board demanding that I reconsider. I received a formal letter from their lawyer, a guy named Preston Hill who specialized in HOA law. His letter was full of bluster about good faith and community standards, and warned me of the consequences of my actions. Rebecca responded on my behalf, calmly reiterating that I was within my rights and would not be withdrawing the termination notice. Meanwhile, I quietly moved my propane tanks to a storage unit off-property. I took photos and kept the rental receipt. If Patricia wanted to claim I was still in violation, I had documentation proving otherwise, but she seemed to have bigger problems now than my grill tanks. The Meadowbrook Heights Community Center was booked solid for the next 6 weeks. There were birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, a wedding reception, and dozens of smaller events. All of them relied on that commercial kitchen, which would be unusable without propane. The HOA was scrambling to find alternative solutions. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they had contacted Mountain Gas about rerouting the supply line. The estimate came back at $47,000. The work would take at least 2 months and would require tearing up significant portions of the community landscaping. The HOA budget did not have that kind of money available without a special assessment on all homeowners. Patricia tried to rally the neighborhood against me. She sent out an email blast explaining that one selfish resident was putting everyone's events at risk over a minor rule violation. She did not name me specifically, but everyone knew who she meant. Some of my neighbors stopped talking to me. Old Jim Morrison from across the street told me I was being childish. The Harrisons 3 doors down gave me dirty looks whenever our paths crossed, but not everyone took Patricia's side. I started getting quiet words of support from unexpected corners. Sarah Kim, who had been fined $500 for having her trash cans visible from the street for 15 minutes after collection time, stopped by with a bottle of wine. "Give them hell," she said with a grin. David and Jennifer Park, who had been cited for having unauthorized plants in their front yard, actually started a petition supporting my right to terminate the easement. They gathered 43 signatures from residents who were tired of Patricia's authoritarian management style. The month crawled by. Patricia tried several more times to negotiate, always with the same offer. I would withdraw the termination, and they would suspend the propane tank violation. I refused every time because I knew what would happen. The moment I backed down, Patricia would find some new angle to attack me. She would make my life miserable in ways that were just legal enough to avoid consequences. No, if I was doing this, I was going all the way. 3 days before the easement termination was set to take effect, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Valdez, this is Gary Chen from Mountain Gas Company. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I was immediately on guard. "What is this about? I understand you are terminating the easement that allows us to service the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center. I wanted to reach out personally and see if there was any way we could resolve this situation." "You should probably talk to my lawyer," I started to say. "Please just hear me out," Gary interrupted. "I am not calling on behalf of the HOA. I am calling because your situation got me curious, so I did some digging into the history of that easement and the HOA's propane rules, and I found something interesting." "What did you find?" "The HOA's ban on residential propane storage. It was pushed through by Patricia Henshaw specifically to pave the way for the HOA to open a propane refill business at the community center. She wanted to corner the market in your development. Residents would not be allowed to store propane at home, but they could buy refills at inflated prices from the HOA. I sat up straighter. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. She submitted a business plan to the HOA board 9 months ago. The propane ban was passed right after, and she planned to launch the refill station this spring. I have copies of the emails if you want them. She never filed for the proper permits with us or with the county, by the way. The whole thing would have been operating illegally. Why are you telling me this? Gary sighed. Because I am tired of dealing with Patricia Henshaw. She has been a nightmare customer. She argues about every bill, demands discounts we cannot give her, and treats our technicians like servants. When I heard she was facing consequences for her behavior, I figured you deserved to know the full story. Plus, if the HOA does not pay us for the gas they have already used, I need to know who else might have liability. Your property, your easement. Send me everything you have, I said. Already done. Check your email. I pulled up my laptop and found Gary's message waiting. Attached were dozens of documents, business plans, financial projections, internal HOA emails discussing the propane refill scheme. And there, in black and white, was Patricia's motivation for creating the propane storage ban. It had nothing to do with safety or aesthetics. It was about creating a monopoly and profiting from it. I forwarded everything to Rebecca immediately. She called me back within an hour. This changes things, she said. If Patricia enacted that rule for personal financial gain, that could be a breach of her fiduciary duty to the HOA. More importantly, it means the rule itself might be invalid. Rules have to be passed for legitimate community purposes, not to enrich board members. What do I do with this information? Honestly, you hold on to it. Let the easement termination go into effect as planned. When they sue you, which they probably will, we bring this out as evidence of bad faith on their part. It will completely undermine their case. The day the easement termination took effect was a Friday. I took the day off work and stayed home, half expecting Patricia to show up with a court order or the police or something. But nothing happened. The community center still had propane in their tanks, enough to last another week or two. But Mountain Gas could no longer access the property to refill them once they ran dry. That weekend, the community center hosted a wedding reception for the daughter of one of the board members. I heard it went off without a hitch, though they were already rationing propane use by that point. Monday morning, I received a summons. The HOA was suing me for breach of contract, arguing that my termination of the easement was done in bad faith, and seeking an injunction to force me to restore access. The lawsuit also demanded I pay for any losses incurred by the HOA due to canceled events or the cost of alternative arrangements. Rebecca filed our response 3 days later. We argued that the easement was properly terminated according to its own terms, that I had legitimate grievances with the HOA's management, and that the propane ban was enacted in bad faith for Patricia's personal profit. We attached all the documents Gary Chen had provided. The effect was immediate and explosive. 2 days after our filing, I got a call from Marcus Webb, the vice president. "Yates, we need to talk," he said. He sounded exhausted. "I am listening." "The board held an emergency meeting last night. Patricia has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into the propane refill business allegations. We have hired an independent auditor to review all her decisions as president." "Good," I said. We also voted to rescind the propane storage ban, effective immediately. It should never have been passed without proper notice to residents, and given the circumstances around its creation, the board feels it is not in the community's best interests to enforce it. Also good. Marcus hesitated. "We would like to request that you restore the easement. I know Patricia wronged you, and I know this whole situation is her fault, but there are a lot of innocent people being affected. Families who have weddings and birthday parties planned. We are willing to put everything in writing. The propane ban is gone permanently. We will pay your legal fees." We will issue a formal apology. Just please, let us restore gas service to the community center." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to keep pushing, to make them suffer the way Patricia had made so many residents suffer over the years. But Marcus was right. Innocent people were being hurt by this. Kids were having birthday parties canceled. Couples were scrambling to find new venues for their celebrations. "I want a new easement agreement," I said. "One that is not contingent on good relations or any subjective standard. A permanent easement with fair compensation. How much? $200 a month. And the HOA pays all legal costs to draft and record the new easement." Marcus did not even hesitate. "Done. I will have our lawyer draw up the papers today." "One more thing," I said. "I want Patricia removed as president, not administrative leave. Gone." "That is already in the works," Marcus said quietly. "Once the audit is complete, she is going to be facing some serious consequences. The board is discussing removing her entirely, not just from the presidency. There are some financial irregularities beyond just the propane thing." "What kind of irregularities?" "I probably should not say anything until the audit is complete. But let us just say that the propane refill business was not the only time Patricia put her own interests ahead of the community." The new easement agreement was signed a week later. Mountain Gas restored service to the community center the next day. Events went back to being booked solid. Life in Meadowbrook Heights returned to something approaching normal, but the drama was far from over. The independent audit of Patricia's tenure as HOA president took 6 weeks. When the results came back, they were damning. Patricia had been embezzling money from the HOA for nearly 2 years. Nothing huge at any one time, just small amounts here and there. A few $100s from the landscaping budget, claiming the contractor had charged more than they actually did. A few thousand from the reserve fund, supposedly for emergency repairs that never happened. All told, she had stolen nearly $18,000 from the community. There were other abuses too. She had been selectively enforcing rules against people she did not like while letting her friends slide. She had approved contracts for work that never got done, then covered it up with falsified invoices. She had used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, claiming they were business-related. The board held another emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president and as a member of the board entirely. They also voted to pursue criminal charges. I found out about the criminal charges from Jim Morrison, the neighbor who had called me childish a few weeks earlier. He came over with a sheepish expression and an apology. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "I thought you were just being petty about the propane tanks." I did not realize how bad things were with Patricia. The stuff in that audit, it is unbelievable. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "For what it is worth, you did the right thing. If you had not pushed back, we might never have looked closely at what she was doing." The criminal investigation moved forward through the summer. I was not directly involved, but I followed the news through the neighborhood grapevine and the occasional updates from Marcus, who had taken over as interim president. Patricia tried to fight the charges at first, claiming everything was a misunderstanding, that the audit was biased against her, that Marcus and I had conspired to destroy her reputation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, falsified documents. The county district attorney had an airtight case. In August, Patricia pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband filed for divorce a week after the sentencing. Last I heard, she was serving her time at the Women's Correctional Facility in Cannon City. The HOA held elections in September. Marcus ran for president and won easily. One of his first acts was to create a new transparency policy, requiring all board meetings to be open to residents and all financial records to be available for inspection. He also established a formal appeals process for violations, so residents could challenge citations they felt were unfair. I ran for a position on the board myself and won a seat. I figured if I was going to live in a community with an HOA, I might as well have a say in how it was run. My first order of business was proposing a complete review of all community rules and regulations. We found dozens of outdated, poorly written, or unnecessarily restrictive rules that needed to be revised or eliminated. The propane tank issue that started everything became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Heights. New residents heard the story and were always amazed. Some people thought I was a hero. Others thought I was vindictive. I thought I was just a guy who got tired of being pushed around and finally pushed back. One evening in October, I was grilling steaks on my back deck using one of the propane tanks that had caused so much trouble. Sarah Kim and her husband came over for dinner, along with David and Jennifer Park. We sat outside enjoying the cool autumn air, and Sarah raised her wine glass in a toast. "To Yates," she said, "the man who took on the HOA and won." "I did not really win," I said. "I just refused to lose." "Same thing," David said with a grin. "We ate and drank and talked about neighborhood gossip. The Harrisons were putting in a new fence. The Johnsons were thinking about selling. Old Jim Morrison had been caught by the new HOA board with grass that was technically a quarter-inch too long, and Marcus had personally come over to tell him not to worry about it. It was fine. Nobody was going to cite him. "That is what an HOA should be," Jennifer said. "Looking out for the community, not just looking for violations." "It is amazing what happens when you get rid of the bad apples," Sarah agreed. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my deck alone with a beer and looked up at the stars. My propane tank sat peacefully next to my shed, no longer a violation or a threat or anything but what they had always been. 2 metal cylinders that let me grill food in my own backyard. I thought about everything that had happened. The anger I had felt when Patricia first showed up with that violation notice. The satisfaction of finding the easement loophole. The stress of the legal battle. The vindication when the truth about Patricia's schemes came out. Had it been worth it? A lot of people would probably say no. I could have just moved my propane tanks and avoided the whole mess. I could have kept my head down and not made waves. But that was not really the point. The point was that communities are supposed to work for the people in them, not the other way around. When someone abuses their power, whether it is a corporate CEO or a city councilman or a HOA president, someone has to be willing to stand up and say no. I had said no. And it turned out that one no, backed up by legal rights and determination and a refusal to be bullied, was enough to bring down a petty tyrant and reform a broken system. Would I do it again if I had to? Absolutely. Would I recommend others do the same? That was trickier. Fighting an HOA was exhausting, expensive, and time-consuming. It had dominated my life for months. There were days when I had wanted to give up, to just move somewhere without an HOA and be done with it. But I had stuck it out and things were better now. Not perfect, but better. The HOA actually worked for residents instead of harassing them. Rules were enforced fairly and with common sense. The community center was thriving, with that commercial kitchen running smoothly on propane, supplied through the easement I now got paid for every month. Sometimes you have to break things to fix them. Sometimes you have to be willing to cause a little chaos to create lasting change. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand your ground over something as simple and stupid as 2 propane tanks in your backyard. I finished my beer and headed inside. Tomorrow was another workday, another round of furnace repairs and AC installations. Life went on like it always did. But now it went on in a community that was just a little bit more fair, a little bit more accountable, and a lot less tyrannical than it had been before. All because I had refused to let Patricia Henshaw push me around. All because I had found a pressure point and pushed back. All because I had been willing to cut off the gas supply to their precious community kitchen, until they agreed to treat residents with basic respect in the end. That was what it had really been about. Not propane tanks or easements or violations. It had been about respect. About being treated like a human being rather than a subject to be ruled over. About demanding that people with power be held accountable when they abused it. Those were principles worth fighting for, even if the battlefield was just a suburban HOA in Colorado. Even if the weapon was just a gas supply line running under my property. Even if the enemy was just a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and too much time on her hands. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Marcus. The engineering firm had finished their assessment of other HOA infrastructure in the neighborhood. Apparently, several other utility easements had been granted under similar terms to mine. The HOA was now reaching out to those homeowners to negotiate fair compensation agreements before anyone else decided to exercise their termination rights. I could not help but smile at that. Patricia's legacy was going to cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars in new easement payments. Every month, they would be writing checks to homeowners whose property they needed to access. Every month, they would be reminded that residents had rights and power too. Marcus's email also mentioned that the recovered funds from Patricia's restitution payments were being used to establish an emergency fund for residents who faced financial hardship and struggled to pay HOA dues or violations. It was a small gesture, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the HOA thought about its role. Instead of just being enforcers and collectors, they were trying to actually help the community. I got dressed and headed out for my first job of the day, a heat pump installation in Arvada. As I drove past the community center, I saw workers replacing the landscaping that had been torn up during the gas supply drama. The new plants looked nice, carefully chosen to require minimal water in Colorado's dry climate. Another Marcus initiative, making the community more sustainable and practical. The job in Arvada took most of the morning. The homeowners were a young couple with a new baby, and they were anxious about getting the heat pump installed before winter really set in. I worked carefully, making sure everything was perfect. When I fired up the system and it hummed to life smoothly, the husband actually shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea how stressful this has been. Our old furnace died last week, and with the baby, we could not have made it through winter without heat." "Happy to help," I told him. I gave them a tutorial on how to use the system efficiently and left them my card in case they had any questions. Driving back toward Meadowbrook Heights for a lunch break, I got a call from Rebecca, my lawyer. "Good news," she said. "The HOA has officially dropped their lawsuit against you. They filed the dismissal with prejudice this morning, meaning they cannot refile it later." "That is good news," I said. "Better news. They have also agreed to pay your legal fees in full plus an additional $5,000 for your time and trouble. Consider it an informal settlement for the harassment you dealt with," I whistled. "Marcus actually got that approved." He did. Apparently, the new board feels terrible about how everything went down. They wanted to make things right. After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a moment, processing. $5,000 was not life-changing money, but it was significant. More than that, it was an acknowledgement that I had been wronged. It was the HOA admitting, in the only language that really mattered, that they had screwed up. I decided to use part of that money to throw a neighborhood barbecue. Not a huge thing, just an invitation to everyone on my street to come over on a Saturday afternoon. I would grill burgers and hot dogs using my notorious propane tanks, and we would all just hang out and be neighbors. When I floated the idea past Sarah Kim, she loved it. That is perfect. This neighborhood needs some positive energy after all the drama. The barbecue happened 2 weeks later on a crisp Saturday in early November. I had been worried that people would not show up, that I was still too controversial. But by noon, my backyard was full of neighbors, kids running around playing tag, adults standing in clusters chatting and laughing. Marcus came with his wife and teenage daughter. "This is great, Yates," he said, accepting a burger. "Really great. The neighborhood feels different lately, you know. More friendly. That is what happens when people are not constantly worried about getting violations," I said. Jim Morrison cornered me by the grill. "I have been meaning to ask you something. How did you know that easement termination would work? Were you just bluffing, or did you really think it through?" Honestly, I was angry and not thinking clearly at first. But once I looked into it and talked to my lawyer, I realized I actually had leverage. The key was being willing to use it. A lot of people have power they do not even know about because they never push back. "Well, it worked out," Jim said. "And for what it is worth, I voted for you in the board election. We need people who are not afraid to shake things up." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself talking to people I had barely spoken to before. The Martins, who lived down at the end of the street. The Crawfords, who had just moved in over the summer. The elderly couple whose names I had never learned, but who turned out to be Tom and Nancy Foster. Retired teachers who had fascinating stories about teaching in rural Colorado in the 1970s. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. Not people isolated in their houses, afraid of their own HOA, but neighbors who actually knew and cared about each other. Later in the evening, after most people had gone home, a small group of us sat around my fire pit. I had hooked up a propane feed to it, and the flames danced cheerfully in the gathering darkness. Sarah and her husband were there, along with David and Jennifer Park, Marcus and his wife, and a few others. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "When you sent that easement termination notice, did you really think it would go all the way? Did you think Patricia would actually let gas service get cut off?" "Honestly, no," I admitted. "I thought she would back down within a week." But she was so convinced she was right, so sure that she had all the power, that she could not imagine losing. That is what happens when people surround themselves with yes men and never face real consequences. "It is scary how much damage one bad person can do in a position like that," Marcus said. "I have been looking at Patricia's decisions going back years, and it is unbelievable. So many arbitrary rules, so many unfair citations, and nobody could stop her because she had her allies on the board." "How did she keep getting re-elected?" Jennifer asked. "Nobody ran against her," Marcus explained. "HOA elections are usually just rubber stamps. People do not pay attention until something affects them personally. That is changing now. We have had more resident involvement in the last 3 months than in the previous 3 years combined." "That is the silver lining," I said. "People are paying attention now. They realize that these decisions matter, that HOA leadership actually has an impact on their daily lives." David raised his beer. "Here is to paying attention, and to people who are willing to be a pain in the ass when necessary." We all drank to that, The fire burned low, and eventually people drifted away to their homes. I stayed outside for a while, making sure the fire was completely out, then went inside. The house was quiet. I had lived here 3 years, and for most of that time, I had felt vaguely unwelcome in my own neighborhood, like I was constantly being watched for violations. Now, for the first time, it felt like home. Over the next few months, the HOA continued to reform. Marcus and the new board rewrote the covenant rules, eliminating dozens of petty restrictions. They established reasonable standards for things like lawn maintenance and exterior modifications, but with built-in flexibility for special circumstances. They created an ombudsman position, a neutral party who could mediate disputes between residents and the board. Most importantly, they changed the culture. Violations were treated as opportunities to help residents come into compliance, not as opportunities to levy fines. The default assumption was that people were acting in good faith, not trying to skirt the rules. I served out my term on the board and learned a lot about community governance. It was not easy work. People had strong opinions about everything from what color the community center should be painted to whether dogs should be allowed off-leash in the common areas. But at least now there was real dialogue, real discussion. Instead of just Patricia handing down edicts from on high in March, nearly a year after the whole propane tank saga had started, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia, forwarded from the correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly reflective. Patricia admitted that she had let power go to her head, that she had started to see residents as problems to be solved rather than neighbors to be served. She talked about the financial pressures she had been under, medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment that had driven her to embezzle money. She said she was not making excuses, just trying to explain. She apologized. Not for sending me that first violation notice about the propane tanks. She did not mention that specifically. But for the culture of fear she had created, for abusing her position, for betraying the trust the community had placed in her. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I did not feel particularly forgiving. Patricia had made a lot of people miserable, and her financial problems, while sympathetic, did not excuse embezzlement and abuse of power. But I appreciated the apology for what it was, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I never wrote back. There was nothing I wanted to say to her. That chapter of my life, of our community's life, was closed. Spring came to Meadowbrook Heights with an explosion of color. The new landscaping around the community center bloomed beautifully. The neighborhood kids played street hockey and rode bikes. People actually talked to each other again, no longer afraid that every interaction might result in a violation report. My HVAC business was thriving. The reputation I had built for being willing to stand up to authority, oddly enough, had attracted customers. People liked hiring someone who they knew would be straight with them, who would not back down when something was not right. I replaced my old grill with a newer model, a fancy stainless steel beast with multiple burners and a rotisserie attachment. It ran on propane, of course. Those 2 tanks sat right where they had always sat, next to my shed, no longer a violation, no longer a source of stress. Just tools that let me cook good food for my friends and neighbors. On a warm evening in May, I hosted another barbecue. This time it was not just my street but the whole neighborhood. We had grown into a real community over the past year, and people wanted to celebrate that. The turnout was huge, with families bringing side dishes and desserts, kids running wild, adults clustered in happy groups. Marcus gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their engagement and participation in making Meadowbrook Heights a better place to live. He specifically thanked me, which was embarrassing but also kind of nice. Yates showed us that one person can make a difference, Marcus said. He stood up when it would have been easier to give in, and because of that, we all live in a better, fairer community now. People clapped, and I felt my face get hot. I was not used to being the center of attention like that. But as I looked around at all the smiling faces, at the kids playing and the neighbors laughing together, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I had been fighting for, even if I had not fully articulated it at the time. Not just the right to keep propane tanks in my yard, but the right to live in a community where people were treated with dignity and respect, where rules served the residents, not the other way around, where power was exercised with humility and accountability. It had cost me time, money, and stress. There had been days when I wondered if I was being ridiculous, if I should just let it go. But I had not let it go, and that had made all the difference. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains and the party continued into the evening, I manned my grill with a beer in one hand and tongs in the other, flipping burgers and talking to neighbors. My propane tanks hummed quietly beside me, providing the fuel that made it all possible. In the end, it really was that simple. Sometimes you have to be willing to cut off the gas to their community kitchen. Sometimes you have to be willing to cause disruption and chaos. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy, at least temporarily, to make things right. And sometimes, if you are lucky and stubborn and just a little bit clever, it all works out. The tyrants fall, the rules change, and the community becomes something worth being part of. I never regretted sending that easement termination notice. It was the best decision I ever made in Meadowbrook Heights. Not because it felt good in the moment, though I would be lying if I said there was not some satisfaction in it, but because it started a chain of events that transformed our neighborhood from a place ruled by fear into a place built on respect. That was worth fighting for. That was worth a few propane tanks, a legal battle, and a whole lot of stress. Looking back now, I would not change a thing.